is a dramatic chapter which speaks about the individual's responsibility towards God. And you can see how God wanted to stress that because he was speaking to cultures that thought way more in terms of community. Now, that's one thing. On the other side, in modern culture, and I would say especially in American culture, but unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever one you say it, American culture has influenced Western culture to a great degree. Individuality is greatly presumed. Therefore, you have a lot of people today who honestly, they really believe I can be a really fine Christian and have no connection with the church whatsoever. And they have no problem with that in their mind. Now, biblically speaking, that's a tough idea. And what we're called to do biblically is hold both ideas in their proper place. Is there a place for understanding that the individual has their own accountability before God? Absolutely there is. But is there also a place for understanding that there's a role for community and that community is important to God? Absolutely. Both are true. We use an expression, I think this is just in American English we use it, maybe the British use it as well. But we say, you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Does that translate in any other countries? Nobody else says that, do they? But it's a great expression, I think. Because you could say, okay, I can only chew gum. I can't walk at the same time. Or I can only walk, I can't chew gum. You have to be able to hold two things in mind at the same time. Now, if you only, or if you overemphasize the role of the individual, you can say that church participation, church community isn't very important, but it is important. It's important to be committed to a church. Second reason why it's difficult to have church community is we live in the midst of a culture that sees no need for Christian community. None. Now, you go back even 50 years ago into Scandinavian culture or European culture. 50 years ago, people who weren't even saved would go to church. They saw the need for some kind of Christian community, even if you weren't saved. Now, you can say, well, it's good that people aren't hypocrites anymore and that, that. But I want you to see that there is nothing in the culture that's going to encourage us to have a commitment to Christian community. Nothing. Nothing in the culture. Matter of fact, the culture is going to kind of communicate waste of time. You should do other things with your time. But we are not going to receive any encouragement whatsoever from the culture around us. Make a commitment to Christian community. That's the second reason. And the third reason why it's difficult to have church commitment is the weakness and the failings of the church. Let's face it, you start talking about church problems and you can go on all day long. And I say this of churches that I have pastored. Sometimes the pastor sees the problems in the church more clearly than anybody. And it's true. The churches we belong to, the churches we pastor, even the good churches, if you wanted to only focus on the weak and failing parts of it, it's very easy to do, and you could just give up. So I think understanding those three things makes us understand why it's difficult to have a church commitment. Nevertheless, I believe that it's very important for us as Christians to be committed to a local congregation. And I'll give you three reasons why I think it's important to have a church commitment. We'll spend the rest of our time talking about these three reasons. Okay? So first I gave you three reasons why it's difficult. Now I'm going to tell you three reasons why I think it's important for us to overcome those difficulties and to make a commitment to a local church body. I'll just tell you what the three are, and then we'll go through and talk about them. The first one is the pattern of Jesus. Secondly, the example of the New Testament. And then thirdly, our own Christian growth and sanctification. Those three reasons are why it's important for us to have a church commitment. So what do I mean by the pattern of Jesus? Well, turn in your Bibles to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. I love this little passage. It's one that I've read in the Bible several times and not really thought about. But some years ago, I was teaching through the Gospel of Luke, and this kind of struck me. I go, wow, I never really noticed that. Luke chapter 4, verses 16 and 17, we read, "So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. And he was handed to Isaiah, and when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written," and then it goes on to describe what Jesus said. Now, here, Jesus is going to the synagogue in Nazareth. Where did Jesus grow up? We'll make this a little interactive here. Where did Jesus grow up? Nazareth. Now, although it might be interesting for you to know that when he started his ministry, he moved from Nazareth to the village of Capernaum. Matthew chapter 4 tells us that. Verses 12 and 13 say that when Jesus started his ministry, he moved from Nazareth to Capernaum. So properly speaking, we would say at this time, Jesus didn't make his home in Nazareth, but that's where he grew up. This is the synagogue where he went as a child. And notice what it says. It says, verse 16, "And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day." Isn't that remarkable? It was custom